Welcome to Talking Business, a podcast produced in Melbourne, Australia. The podcast is available on the Acast site, my own website, the Apple Podcast Store, or wherever you go to get your podcasts. Or you can get it at the Business Acumen website at www.businessacumen.biz or at Banking Day for the most exclusive access to leading economists and business leaders from around the world. Subscribe to Talking Business from my website, leongettler.com. I am Leon Gettler. My job is to review and monitor the week's news in business, finance and economics. I bring it all to you every week. This is episode number 37 in our series for 2024, and today's date is Friday, October the 11th. First, I'll be talking to Chris Noone, CEO of ASIC-listed car subscription company Carly, about the Australian Tax Office ruling on car subscriptions, what they mean for Carly and car users, and why car owners are cautious about transitioning from gas guzzlers to EVs. The Carly car subscription service offers car users and companies access to an EV, like Netflix, as simple as that. And I'll be talking to RMIT economist Sinclair Davidson about the relationship between the government and the Reserve Bank of Australia. But first, let's talk to Chris Noone.
Well, Chris, the ATO ruling has ruled in favour of the Carly car subscription service. What does that mean for other Aussie drivers who aren't using the Carly subscription service?
So what it means is that people who are currently not using Carly can actually get a novated subscription with Carly. So the product ruling that we've received from the ATO is exclusive to Carly, and because it relates to the business relationship we have with the subscribers and also the structure of our agreements as well. So to set up a salary package or novated subscription, we've partnered with SG Fleet, which is one of the biggest players in the salary packaging market, and they will be offering this to the employees who work for employers who have signed up for SG Fleet salary packaging services. So anyone who signs a novation agreement under this ruling, takes out a subscription with Carly, will be able to get the FBT exemption on electric vehicles. And what that really means, in essence, is that they can save between 35% and 50% on the cost of a normal subscription for an EV.
But car owners are very cautious about transitioning to EVs at the moment, aren't they?
That's exactly why we've launched this product. They're cautious about buying EVs, but subscription is a flexible way of getting access to a car. A normal car subscription is minimum 1 month, and the salary package subscription that we have is a minimum of 3 months, and that's a stipulation by the ATO. So it allows drivers to try an EV for 3 months or more, get access to the FBT exemption, and not have that long-term risk of potentially buying a car that wasn't suitable for their needs.
Right, and so they're just leasing it.
So it's different to a lease. A lease is typically 2, 3 or 4 years long, and there are some pretty big break costs if you want to terminate a lease in the middle of the lease period. Under a lease, essentially what's happening is the car's being bought on your behalf and you're entering into a finance agreement for that. With subscription, it's a more flexible product. Our subscriptions are normally minimum 30 days and 30 days notice to return the car. So you could have a car for 6 or 7 months of the year, or you could take it on in 1 month, have a monthly recurring subscription. When you feel that you want to change the car or you no longer need the car because your work circumstances change, you're traveling overseas, you might be, doing something totally different with your life, moving to a different area and then catching the bus, you can then give 30 days notice and return the vehicle.
So it's completely flexible.
Yes, that's right.
So what will it take to give up the gas guzzlers for EVs? Because people are having a lot of trouble with that, because I see SUVs always on the road everywhere.
That's right. It's the transition from internal combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles is similar to the transition from the horse to the car. It is a very, very different technology. And what we've recognised in the market is that the early adopters have all bought EVs. They would have bought them no matter how much they cost, how many issues there might have been with using those vehicles, and also issues around resale value. They didn't really care because they just wanted the new technology. And with the technology adoption curve, there's always that group of people who will go and buy new technology, regardless of any potential downsides. What we're waiting for is the early majority to come through with electric vehicles. And we've recognised that a lot of people are just confused. They don't know what to believe about range anxiety. They don't know what to believe about residual value issues. They're not sure if the charging network is suitable, and they're not really sure if they're going to like driving an electric vehicle. So that's why we launched our EV trial product, to allow people to try an electric vehicle before they buy. It would be terrible to spend $40,000 or $60,000 on an EV and find that it wasn't suitable for you. You might have been better off buying a plug-in hybrid or a hybrid, or staying with an internal combustion engine vehicle. So what we like to do is give people confidence in making a knowledgeable decision about buying or leasing an EV in the future.
So your system actually just allows people to just try it and see if it works.
That's right. So a lot of our customers will keep subscribing to a vehicle for a year or more. Our average subscription period is 5 months, and the minimum is 30 days. Under the novated subscription, it has to be 3 months, but still it's a lot more flexible than buying or taking a loan for a vehicle.
So the average user stays for 5 months, did you say?
Yes, that's right.
Right, but they can hold on to the EV for a year or however
That's
long.
right. So they can either do a fixed term subscription. They might be going overseas on a certain date in 6 months' time. So they say, I want to hand back the car the day before I leave. That's fine, we can do that. Or it can just be a monthly recurring subscription, like your mobile phone, like your Netflix, and then you just give 30 days notice to hand the car back.
Right, okay. So the ATO has actually made the process easier for Aussie drivers. Would that be right?
I wouldn't say they've made it easier. They've made it a lot cheaper. So previously, we weren't able to get access to the FBT exemption for electric vehicles. Now what we can do is apply the FBT exemption, which saves between 35 and 50% on the payment for the subscription vehicle. Previously, that was only available if you took a long-term lease of a vehicle. So we've taken it back from a minimum commitment of around 3 years to a minimum commitment of 3 months.
And for people to take a long-term lease, that would cost them a lot of money.
Yeah, well, a novated lease with the FBT exemption, which does reduce your tax, can be the most cost-effective way to get into an electric vehicle, because the government is essentially funding part of the cost of that vehicle. And about half of the novated leases that are written in Australia at the moment are for electric vehicles, but you do need to make that multi-year commitment. What we're offering is a much more flexible product with similar cost savings.
Why are Australians finding it so hard to move to electric vehicles?
There's the initial cost of the vehicles. There's the anxiety about range, residual values, charging network. What we feel is that these are perceptions, and you don't know whether the perception is real or not until you actually get into an EV and try it. If you listen to the media, you'll hear one thing. If you listen to your friends who are EV early adopters, they will tell you another thing. So we think that a lot of people are just sitting in the middle and just confused. And that's why we're seeing sales of hybrids and plug-in hybrids go up quite dramatically, because people are saying, I'm willing to move towards that. I'm just probably not ready to make that full commitment because I don't have enough knowledge about what I'm really getting myself into.
Well, the other issue too is for a lot of potential EV buyers is there's so much choice. I mean, they can go to Teslas, they can go to BYDs, they can go to the Hyundais, all of that stuff.
And also there seems to be a new Chinese brand entering the market every week. You've got Zeekr, XPeng, Aura, GWM, all bringing out new vehicles. So it is a complexing position for drivers. And that's why we think our product's perfectly suited to this market, because you don't have any depreciation risk on the vehicle. If you don't like the vehicle, you don't like the EV experience, you can just hand the car back and then make another decision.
But do you get a choice of different types of EVs?
Yes, we do have a choice of vehicles. So it's not as much choice if you were buying your own car. If you want to get the red BYD Atto 3 with the blue upholstery, we probably don't have that level of customization. But we do have a fleet of vehicles that we own that are available, and we try to have as much variety in that fleet as possible. It's not all just one brand. We have lots of different models. We also have relationships with manufacturers such as Hyundai and Genesis, and we work with a number of dealer groups who put their own vehicles into our subscription platform as well. So we've got vehicles from Mazda, Toyota, Hyundai, Genesis, BYD, Land Rover, whole range of different vehicles to suit different needs.
So you have an extensive network. Is this nationwide?
We're mainly on the East Coast, so Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane and areas in between are our strongest area, but we're very much an online and virtual business. So when we have relationships in other areas of Australia, we have demand, we can match that supply and demand and provide those subscription vehicles.
And so because it's online, anyone can come to you from anywhere.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. So we have an online subscription process. We verify the customer online, we collect the payments online, and typically the vehicle is available for pickup in about 48 hours.
That's quite extraordinary. And that's from anywhere.
Well, almost anywhere. As I said, Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane are our main hubs, but we do have vehicles in other areas as well.
Do you service regional areas as well?
So we do. We have a lot of corporate clients in the regional areas, and we'll either find supply of those vehicles locally or we'll deliver those vehicles to them.
Now, most of your clients would be corporates. Would that be right?
No, majority is consumer, but we have an increasing number of corporate clients. What we find is that the use case for consumers and businesses is pretty much the same. They need a car for a longer period than a rental, but they don't want to commit to taking a loan or purchasing a vehicle outright for the next 3 or 4 years.
So subscription would be perfect for them, similar to something like Netflix or Stan.
Yeah, that's right. It's opt-in and opt-out. It's not like car share, which is the 1 hour to 1 day type scenario where cars are parked on the street and hundreds of people are using those cars. This is a vehicle that is yours for the whole period of time that you want it.
And and for a minimum of 3 months.
If you want to get the novated subscription and get the benefit of the FBT exemption, but for a normal subscription, it's a minimum 30 days.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Great to be here.
And now let's talk to RMIT economist Sinclair Davidson.
Okay. Well, Sinclair, what's your view about the stoush between the government and the opposition about the new rate setting board at the RBA?
Look, I think it's all very fascinating. I just love a good stoush. There are just so many things to talk about this because there's just so many things that have gone wrong, that have been silly, that have been stupid. So it's all a bit of a circus, I suppose, a bit of a charade almost, a huge distraction from Canberra as to who should be doing what. But the long and the short of it is that when it came to power 2 years ago, the current government had an unnecessary review of the Reserve Bank. They had it in mind. They wanted to review the Reserve Bank. They did. A whole bunch of recommendations came out of it, one of which was that we separate the current Reserve Bank board into 2 boards, where one board is responsible for setting interest rates and the other board is responsible for the governance of the Reserve Bank itself. So far, so good. The challenge really is that who on the current Reserve Bank board should remain on the interest rate setting board and who should go to the, let's call it the governance board. And that's what the argument is all about, because the opposition are afraid that the government are going to shift all the, let's say, hard-headed, and let's put hard-headed here in scare quotes, all the hard-headed inflation hawks off the Reserve Bank board onto the governance board and then stack the interest rate setting board with their sort of soft-headed, let's call it, or dovish inflation people. And so that's what the argument is all about. Now, it turns out there's a very easy solution to this problem. And the easy solution to this problem is that you appoint everybody who's currently on the Reserve Bank to both boards. And then as their positions become vacant, you either reappoint them to one or the other, or you appoint 2 new people, 1 to each. So there is actually an easy solution to all of this. But nonetheless, nothing's ever easy in Canberra. And we were having a huge argument over the Reserve Bank when we should actually be having an argument over the economy.
Indeed. And one of the issues that the opposition has said is that the Chalmers has been attacking the RBA board for being too hard on the economy. And you know, I mean, the reality is that I don't know of any government that hasn't said words about the RBA at any stage.
Well, I kind of have mixed thoughts about all of this, and it's the issue really is here is that one of the jobs, which nobody ever talks about, but one of the jobs of the RBA is to act as a lightning rod. They are the people who have, let's call it independence, in scare quotes, independence from the government in setting interest rates. One of the benefits of that independence, that if the government doesn't like what the Reserve Bank is doing or they want to shift blame, is that they can always point to the Reserve Bank and say, blame those guys, it's not us. But of course it is them, because the Reserve Bank isn't really independent of the government, because that's a government agency with government appointees, government mandate, government powers, all these sorts of things. So it's one branch of the executive government criticizing another branch of the executive government, which makes for great theatre. But nonetheless, it is one of those things where actually having some level of independence from government setting interest rates for their own partisan purposes, separate from the government of the day, is probably a good idea. So it is a good idea. So I actually have no problem when the Treasurer actually is seen to be criticizing the Reserve Bank governor, because that is part of her job. But at the same time, she too has gravitas and can push back. And quite honestly, one of the reforms which the current government brought in is that she has to front up to a press conference every other month, which wasn't the case before, and she can front up to the press conference and push back. So again, it's part of the theatre of politics.
Oh, another part of the theatre of politics is I'm very impressed actually with Michelle Bullock's, or the RBA's wording on their reports. They're much more precise than they've been in the past.
Well, they did get very badly burnt with that argument that interest rates weren't going to be rising before 2024. And to be quite honest, I have no sympathy here. Philip Lowe should never have made that comment. And secondly, nobody should ever have believed him, because he doesn't have secret source. He doesn't have secret knowledge. He doesn't have a crystal ball to tell the future. And that was a rather silly thing to have said. And quite rightly, he got called out on it. So yes, she's going to be a lot more precise about what she's saying. And I think she is. And if she is pushing back against the government and embarrassing the government, again, they brought this on themselves with their reforms, which were really unnecessary. So again, it's good fun to watch. It's like soap opera.
Well, the Reserve Bank is saying there won't be an interest rate cut for at least 6 months. And the way inflation is tracking, I'm kind of wondering whether we're going to see a rate cut even before the election.
To be quite honest, my gut feel is that we should actually be seeing rate increases. I think there's been one rate increase since she became governor of the Reserve Bank. And for all the talk about, the Reserve Bank is smashing the economy kind of rhetoric, in actual fact, the government and their partisans have been out and about pressurizing the Reserve Bank to not raise interest rates. And to my mind, that has also become a bit of a concern about the fact that there was uncertainty as to what was going to be happening to the interest rate board. But we now know that the opposition have said they won't support it. So the interest rate board are actually got a bit of clear space to raise interest rates if they really feel the need to do so.
And one of the issues too is the inflation figures are sticky, and we can't even see it getting back to the target band probably till about 2026.
Yeah, so I think that's entirely unacceptable. The notion that the government says we're prepared to tolerate another 2 years of high inflation to avoid a recession, which, to be quite blunt, I think the private sector of the economy in Australia is already in recession. So it's not good enough to say government spending is keeping us out of a recession. What is happening is government spending is masking the recession. So I think we're already in recession, and we just need to get over it and get on with it.
Well, the last GDP figures certainly showed that we were barely growing, and all that was keeping us growing was government spending and migration.
Yes. Now, if you kind of think to how economic policy in Australia goes, it goes around the 3 Ps. So it's population, productivity, and participation. And for the last... Look, I want to say 10 years, but probably maybe not. But for the last long while, population has actually been doing the very heavy lifting around economic policy, and we should really need to get to talk more about productivity. Productivity growth in Australia has been appallingly bad for, I'd say, at least the last 5-6 years or so. And productivity growth in the public sector has been terrible while we have been expanding the size of the public sector. So in actual fact, this government spending, it's creating these jobs, is actually not doing any good for the economy at all.
Right. What do you see is going to be the future with inflation?
I just don't think at the moment the government are overly committed to bringing down inflation. Certainly, we're coming into a general election, so I kind of understand that. But at the same time, we're in a first-term government. These guys do hope to have a second term and a third term. And as Richard Holden wrote in the Financial Review, I think last year, inflation is kryptonite for centre-left governments because everybody notices it. Everybody thinks it's a bad thing. And prices don't ever go down. That's what people don't understand. So even when inflation falls, prices don't go down. So in actual fact, we're in a situation whereby we've got a government that seems to be having a very short-term focus and not thinking about the economic growth in the future. But to be fair, between the coalition and the Labor government, nobody seems to be particularly serious about doing anything major on the economic front. Nobody's talking productivity. Nobody's talking participation. Everybody's talking up population and immigration as a problem about housing. But in actual fact, our economy seems to be at standstill, and there seems to be people fussing about all sorts of silliness in Canberra and not actually focusing on the bread and butter issues that people are going to be caring about.
Right. Okay. So such as productivity,
such as income growth and all this sort of stuff. I mean, right now we've got a big argument about the Reserve Bank itself. The government's talking about raising the age for social media. Last week we had an argument about including LGBTQI plus people in the census. I mean, can you imagine sitting your whole family around the dining room table, filling out the census form and saying, so have you got anything to tell us? That would never get past a university ethics committee.
Well, indeed, they seem to be obsessed with non-important issues.
Absolutely. I mean, I often wonder, and I think we've had this discussion before, why we have the census at all, let alone why we're asking people very highly personal questions that the government's got no business knowing about.
Indeed. Well, Sinclair, it's been great talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you again, Leon.
So what's happening in the news? Well, oil executives have emerged as an increasingly important source of funding for Donald Trump, as industry titans open their wallets to bolster the Republican nominee's campaign for a second term in the White House. The billionaires backing Trump include Kelsey Warren, the Chief Executive Officer of pipeline operator Energy Transfer LP, Harold Hamm, the founder of Continental Resources, and Jeff Hildebrand, CEO of Hillcore Energy. Trump sought more support last week with fundraisers in Midland, Texas, the heart of the prolific Permian Basin, and Houston, the self-styled energy capital of the world. The latest swing builds on May events with donors in Dallas and Houston, and a closed-door energy roundtable with executives at Trump's Mar-a-Lago club in Florida. Oil executives and employees have grown in significance for Trump as his fundraising base has narrowed. The industry is now his fourth biggest source of cash, up 6 places from the 2020 election cycle, according to campaign data analysed by Open Secrets. Trump is promising to make it easier to drill, baby, drill, and to repeal Biden-era pollution curbs on autos and power plants. He's also promised to immediately end President Joe Biden's pause on new natural gas export licenses. Kamala Harris is controlled by environmental extremists who are trying to implement the most radical energy agenda in history and force Americans to purchase electric vehicles they can't afford, said Carolyn Leavitt, National Press Secretary for the Trump campaign. President Trump is supported by people who share his vision of American energy dominance to protect our national security and bring down the cost of living for all Americans. And corporate insolvencies have hit record highs, with more than 6,600 firms faltering in the 6 months to September, fueling warnings small businesses are struggling to stay afloat amid high inflation and interest rates, increasingly complex regulations and cyber attacks. Australian insolvency statistics published by ASIC reveal company insolvencies capturing firms entering external administration for the first time hit 11,053 in 2023-24, swelling overall insolvencies since the 2022 election to 22,800. The corporate regulator listed 3,305 insolvencies in the June quarter and 3,331 in the September quarter, which the coalition says represents the worst 6-month period on record and bakes in the highest average of business insolvencies of any parliamentary term at 2,481 insolvencies per quarter. The hardest hit industries have been construction, accommodation and food services, retail trade, professional, scientific and technical services and manufacturing. Amid wafer-thin economic growth, flatlining productivity and investment concerns raised by big business, New South Wales, Victoria and Queensland recorded the highest number of insolvencies. And half of Australians expect cost of living pressures to deteriorate over the coming 2 years, as a rising number of households suffer extreme levels of financial stress despite federal and state governments rolling out generous subsidies and tax relief. Analysis by AMP shows 66% of Australians over the age of 18 feel financially stressed either mildly, moderately or severely. Only 1 in 3 Australians were financially secure, which was down from half during the pandemic years. Financial stress was higher among those who live in Australia's most expensive city for housing, Sydney, and also Tasmania. Sydney had 30% of residents in the most extreme bracket of financial stress compared to the national average of 27%. With rising financial pressures and people focused on meeting short-term expenses, long-term planning is being compromised, with 1 in 3 saying they are never or are rarely planning for their financial futures. 3 in 5 Australians spent less on groceries this year, according to the AMP survey of 2,475 Australians, while a third have cancelled streaming subscriptions and gym memberships, and 1 in 3 spent less time engaging in regular hobbies and interests. The degree of financial stress is forecast to worsen, with 52% expecting the cost of living will rise significantly. And grocery costs are the biggest pain point for Aussie consumers, despite the recent pullback on official inflation figures, new research has found. And homeowners, rather than renters, are more likely to report that their savings have shrunk or stagnated in the past year, according to the Compare the Market's Household Budget Barometer 2024 report. Its analysis of more than 3,000 consumers discovered that everyday expenses are sending us spiralling, with groceries the most worrisome bill, followed by mortgage repayments, energy bills and rent. The median grocery spend was $200 in August 2024, compared with $150 in January 2024, a 33% rise in just 6 months, the report says. The increase could be in part due to some Australians choosing to cook more at home and dine out less, it says. Bureau of Statistics inflation data put food and beverage growth at 3.4% year on year. The findings come as big supermarkets come under fire from regulators and the Albanese government over pricing practices. However, the fastest rising component of Australian inflation over the past 2 years, insurance, does not appear to worry consumers as much. Compare the Market Economic Director David Koch said spending less money on eating out and takeaway meals meant we spend more at the supermarket, and because most of us do a grocery shop once or more a week, we're confronted with bill shock every few days. Mr. Koch said people did not notice the insurance sting because it was not tangible, and many set up automatic direct debits. We urge Australians to treat their insurance premiums like their groceries and compare them like products on the shelf, Mr. Koch said. And surgeons and other medical specialists are worried about unprecedented pressure on the nation's hospital system and say the federal governments need to inject more funds into the private sector to stop facilities closing and tackle soaring insurance costs. With no sign of movement on Health Minister Mark Butler's review of the $22 billion private hospital system launched in June, specialists warn that dilapidated facilities, ageing medical equipment and staff shortages are threatening patient care. Private hospitals will increasingly pose a patient safety risk if they're not funded appropriately, Australian Society of Ophthalmologists President Peter Sumich said. Dr Sumich blamed chronic underfunding by the health insurance sector and said he was supportive of a public advertising campaign by HealthScope, the country's second biggest private hospital operator, accusing some insurers of underfunding the system. The more that insurers withhold funding, the greater their profits, cash reserves and hospital building projects grow. It's ironic that insurers are both underfunding private hospitals while building their own hospitals in direct competition, Dr Sumich said. The politicians are not going to help. The Labor Party is unmotivated, the Liberals are intimidated, the Independents are disorganised, and the Greens are just happy to watch Rome burn as they dance around the bonfire. Mr Butler ordered the review in June after a string of private hospital closures raised fears of more closures, putting more strain on an already overstretched public system. The government has told industry participants it will not bail out the private sector despite the threat of hospital closures, which Canberra is concerned could hurt services in rural and regional areas. Preliminary findings of a Health Department review said the sector was uninvestable. While hospitals have been pressuring health insurers to tip in more funding, there has been no indication the government will dramatically overhaul the current funding models as part of the review. Royal Australasian College of Surgeons President Karen Fielding said some private hospitals were suspending unprofitable surgeries due to rising cost pressures. She hoped the government's review would address the cost of insurance and lead to a bailout of struggling facilities. We would really be hoping that the government would be looking at some assistance, particularly for the regional and rural private sector, certainly looking at the remuneration from the private health funds, Dr. Fielding said. Private health insurance has been going up and up and up because the cost of healthcare is going up, and the private hospitals are requiring bigger payments for cases, and people are dropping out of the funds. Dr. Fielding, an orthopaedic surgeon, said some private hospitals were cutting theatre lists for some less profitable surgeries, and there were cases where some surgeons were doing fewer major procedures in a day. If we lose the private sector, we're in big trouble. We've got to support it. We do need to ask the government to help us with that support. And it's a $1.10 tin of diced tomatoes that says everything about the challenges facing SPC, the century-old agribusiness powerhouse that last week laid out a plan to return to the ASX by merging with listed juice manufacturer Orange Juice Co. That's the price of a 400-gram can that is sold online by Coles under its own brand. It's produced in Italy and imported into the country by the supermarket giant. SPC's product, under the Ardmona brand, is made here, but it sells for $2.10 per can. Both SPC chairman Hussein Rifaei and Original Juice's Jeff Kennett, the former Victorian Premier, pointed to size as one reason for the merger. The deal will put SPC back onto the ASX for the first time since 2005, when it was purchased by Coca-Cola Amatil. It fell into private equity ownership in 2019, after Coca-Cola had dusted $700 million. The merger will also bring in Nature One Dairy's infant formula and powdered milk business and create a group with annual revenues of $400 million. Still, brokers and investors are pessimistic that SPC, even as a bigger company, will be able to face down the market power of the big supermarket chains, Woolworths and Coles, in the same way that global food powerhouses like Nestle can. In particular, it will be difficult for the company to compete against the cheap home brands, according to Jeff Wilson of Wilson Asset Management. It's good for the consumer, but bad for Australian food producers, he says. It's very difficult for Australian food producers to compete when you've got generic products. Craig Wolford, an analyst at MST Marquee, says shoppers would prefer to buy local products, but only if it was a similar price to other options. They'll buy Australian if the price is still competitive compared with other products, Wolford said. It's very hard to compete against that import competition. Imported fruit was cheaper because there were often substantial subsidies for farmers from the European Union and lower wage rates in South Africa. SPC started out as a cooperative in Victoria's Goulburn Valley in 1917, known as the Shepparton Preserving Company. It merged with arch-rival Ardmona in 2002 and was purchased by Coca-Cola in 2005 for $750 million. Coca-Cola wanted to diversify and expand into healthier products. That did not work, and SPC was sold for $40 million. And ANZ Chief Executive Shayne Elliott doesn't expect to remain in the top job to see through a multi-year integration of Suncorp's bank, as he hinted at a potential changeover in 2025, while the board actively considers the issue of succession. Mr. Elliott said the integration of the $4.9 billion Suncorp bank acquisition was a huge opportunity for ANZ, but he was unlikely to remain at the helm to complete it. That'll take years. I don't think I'll see it through, he said. They can invite me back for some of it. In some of Mr. Elliott's more specific comments on the timing of his departure as CEO, a role he has held since the early 2016, he also said, the timing will be up to them, the ANZ board, and the discussions we've had together over the next year or so. ANZ overcame a series of hurdles to complete its purchase of Suncorp's bank in late July, shifting the focus to how Mr. Elliott will bring the entities together without triggering too much customer leakage. The controversial transaction was announced about 2 years ago and was opposed by the competition regulator in 2023 before that decision was overruled by the Australian Competition Tribunal in February. ANZ board member Christine Riley, a member of the Risk, People and Culture and Nomination Committees, said succession planning was a key responsibility for the bank's non-executive directors. Asked whether ANZ's board was actively assessing CEO succession planning, she said, "It's on the agenda and so it should be. While in Singapore to mark the bank's 50th anniversary of operating there, Mr. Elliott was also asked about succession planning and when he may step down. I've been there in a CEO role for about 8 years, and as time goes on, obviously we talk about it as a board, he said. And Wesfarmers says its fast-growing health division is expected to clock up $6 billion in revenues this year as it expands its digital and pharmacy operations to meet the growing demand from Australians, who it says are sicker than they were before the pandemic. The conglomerate this week released the results of data from more than 3 million health checks taken on portable devices in its network of chemists, which show an alarming increase in obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure, smoking, and the risk of heart disease. It released the data of its first health index, which looked at the data from more than 3 million digital checks on more than 2 million people between 2018 and 2024. Free tests at its health stations located in pharmacies measure key health risk factors like blood pressure, heart rate, body mass index and diabetes risks. The index found nearly 1 in 2 Australians had an elevated risk of heart disease, 29% had high blood pressure, 26% were obese, 13% were daily smokers, 6% had diabetes, and nearly 1 million were at extreme risk of a heart attack or stroke. It also broke down the data by states and electorates, which highlighted the inequity between regional and metropolitan areas. A scoring system using the data found the odds of Australians having 2 or more health risk factors were 8% higher than they were in 2018, with people's health declining during the pandemic, but slowly picking up in the years that followed. Wesfarmers health boss Emily Amos said the results showed Australians had let their health deteriorate during COVID-19, with measures of cardiometabolic risk higher than in 2018. The scale of a collection of data on Australians' health highlights the growing role retail giants and insurers are playing in the $220 billion healthcare system, something that does not sit comfortably with some GPs. Ms. Amos said the company had identified growth opportunities in digital, pharmacies, and beauty. She declined to comment on potential acquisition targets, but said revenues from the division, set up in 2022, would be close to $6 billion this year. Wesfarmers Health grew revenues 6% to $5.6 billion in the year to June. I think data is a really key part of health service delivery going forward, so we do see it as a significant opportunity, and as a way of making health services more accessible, where there are massive gaps in the network. She said in an interview ahead of the launch of the Wesfarmers Health Index on Tuesday. Every part of the business has growth opportunities, so we do see further growth in digital health, particularly medi-aesthetics, beauty care, and through retail pharmacy as well. Perth-based Wesfarmers has targeted health as one of the strongest growth businesses, following the path of US tech supermarket giants buying up GP, dental and radiology clinics. It acquired Australian Pharmaceutical Industries for $1 billion in 2022 and expanded its healthcare offering in 2023 with the $135 million acquisition of Instant Scripts, which offers telehealth consultations, online scripts, medical certificates and blood tests. It also owns beauty chains Clear Skin Care and Silk Laser clinics and a 60% stake in digital medical diagnostic business SISU. And that's it for this week. And next week I'll be talking to Graham Cook, the head of consumer research at Finder, about the growing uptake of buy now, pay later services by Gen Z and Gen Y and the risks. And I'll be talking to Craig James, independent economist, formerly chief economist at CommSec, about what we can expect in the market next week. For the most exclusive access to leading economists and business leaders from around the world, subscribe to Talking Business from my website, leongettler.com. If you like Talking Business, please leave us a review with Apple Podcasts. Thank you in advance. In the meantime, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, or X as it's now known, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. If you want to contact me, email me at leon@leongettler.com. I answer all emails. Also, in my spare time, I have a copywriting business. If anyone needs newsletters, blogs, articles, or advertorial, email me. Wishing you all a safe and healthy week, and looking forward to bringing you Talking Business next week.